for a session brought to you by our underwriter. Please welcome Kim Blackwell, the Vice President of Early Phase Development and Immuno-oncology at Eli Lilly and Company.
Good morning. This morning I'm going to talk to you, give you my thoughts and some of the things we're doing at Lilly about bringing both innovation and collaboration and moving the entire cancer community closer to finding a cure. So this is me over there with my grandfather and my sister, 1978. Right after this picture was taken, my grandfather was diagnosed with a sarcoma of his right arm. Now, he went on to get chemotherapy, and at the time, we really didn't have any medicines to suppress the nausea and vomiting associated with the chemotherapy he was receiving. Most of us know that chemotherapy is like using a sledgehammer to hang up a photo. It kills the normal cells, and it also kills the cancer cells. Now, my grandfather died in July of 1980, and we've made a lot of progress since then. We have medicines so that it's almost unheard of for patients to throw up while they're receiving chemotherapy. But the thing that I think a lot about is the medicine that he received in 1978 was a medicine called doxorubicin, also known as adriamycin. And that is, if you're diagnosed with sarcoma in 2019, it's the exact same medicine you receive. It remains the standard of care 40 years later. And so obviously I'm telling you this story not to make you sad, but to give you a benchmark of where we are and how much better I think we can do. This story kind of told me and influenced my career path into looking into and developing medicines where patients didn't necessarily have to pay a price for facing their disease. And in fact, there are very few human diseases where patients are expected to be sick in order to be treated for their disease. In fact, it would be an unacceptable notion for many diseases outside of cancer. So there's been a lot of hallmarks over the past 100 years, and most of these hallmarks in the late 20th and early 21st century are really built on astonishing technological progress. 30 years ago, I think some of us remember typing on a typewriter. Yesterday, I watched a movie on an airplane and carry a supercomputer around in my pocket. And in some ways, diseases outside of cancer have really kept up with the technological pace that we've seen in other areas. In the past 2 to 3 decades, diseases like HIV, which I'll get to in a minute, and hepatitis C were deemed incurable 30 years ago, are now highly curable with really very straightforward and highly effective medicines. Now, these advances in tech and transportation were possible, and the reason we were able to bring new drugs to patients facing diseases like HIV and hepatitis C is because the science around those diseases kept the pace, such as what we've seen in the tech field, transportation, telecommunication. And so where we've seen progress, it's because innovation has kept the pace. It's also probably due in part to policies, public policies, intellectual property, and patent law that protect innovation. So that's where innovation has taken us in the past 2 to 3 decades. Diseases that were incurable have become curable. What about time? I have one more story to tell you this morning. It's the story of Jennifer. She was 29 when I met her. I just left clinical practice about a year ago, and she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. She was working actually as a cancer researcher at the time, and she went on to get surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and anti-estrogen therapy. About a year after she was diagnosed and finished her treatment, a medicine known as Herceptin, trastuzumab, was approved in order to prevent breast cancer from coming back. And so Jennifer did well until about 7 years after her initial diagnosis, and she actually became pregnant with twins, and at 28 weeks, she actually got quite ill. She slipped into a coma, she went into liver and kidney failure, and she ended up receiving the same medicine that had been approved 7 years earlier, Herceptin, and a medicine that wasn't even available known as lapatinib, which was also for her type of cancer. She lost her babies, but she went on to recover. Her kidneys and liver function got better. And then she spent 9 years facing metastatic breast cancer. She won all kinds of awards. She was quite outspoken on cancer research and the importance of cancer research. And the reason I'm telling you this story is not to make you sad. It's actually an amazing story of recovery and resilience. But I'm telling you this because I'm haunted and driven by this story because I think about it a lot. She was in this weird period where she couldn't participate in the clinical trials at the time because they had all been completed, and the drug had yet not been approved. And I wonder, had we just shaved off a couple days here and a couple weeks here and maybe a month here, if we had just shaved off a little bit of time, her cancer might not have come back at all. And so the point of the story is really time matters, innovation matters, but implementation of innovation in a timely manner is what is very, very important as we move towards finding a cancer cure. So we talked about innovation and time. What about money? Well, money isn't necessarily the answer. It certainly helps. Over $5 billion a year are spent in cancer research. About $140 trillion are spent on cancer care. 1.7 million people will be diagnosed with cancer this year, and 600,000 of them will die of the cancer. I turned to HIV as a model where progress was made very, very quickly. From being identified in 1983, where scientists were scrambling to figure out why men were dying, to 1992, when AIDS was the #1 cause of men in their mid 25 to 44 years of age. But 5 years later, in 1997, the death rate was down by half. And between 2002 and 2011, the number of cases diagnosed was cut by 1/3. Today, most people consider HIV a curable disease, and people have a normal life expectancy if they're treated with adequate medication. Now, finding a treatment for HIV was an all-hands-on deck. It required academic researchers, advocacy, the scale of the pharmaceutical industry, and it was really these results that paid off in a very short time frame. So why is cancer different than HIV? Well, cancer is a lot of different diseases, but as we've started to dissect cancer in this genomic revolution, we realize that we can focus on each subtype of cancer. And so this blueprint of HIV might actually be closer to what we actually need. HIV can be an inspiration that with focus and innovation and money and time, you can take an incurable deadly disease and turn it into a curable one in a matter of a couple decades. That's another way of saying we shouldn't give up on finding a cancer cure. It's going to take new tools and new ways of organizing both the research, the collaboration, and the money. Joe Biden launched the Biden Moonshot Initiative in 2016, and the whole premise of this was to shave off time by bringing innovation and removing silos. Another example of a new way of collaborating is the Parker Cancer Institute for Immunotherapy. And this is basically another way of bringing together academics, researchers, private sector, and advocacies to all work together to figure out how to harness the power of the immune system and move us closer to a cure. So these are all examples of kind of where collaboration and the model that we used to use and the way we collaborated is being changed significantly even within the past 3 to 4 years. So what are we doing at Lilly? Well, across the pharma industry, there's a focus on speed, on accelerating research, and bringing breakthrough medicines to patients faster. When I started my career, we were happy if a medicine added 2 to 3 weeks to a patient's time where their cancer was under control. Breakthrough cancer medicines today, where we're talking about months to years of improvement of overall survival, has really set a much higher bar of expectation as to what constitutes a breakthrough medicine. And I have to say that the cancer community has really risen to this much higher standards. We're starting to have active dialogues with regulatory agencies about what do we really have to prove in terms of safety and efficacy in order to get a drug available and brought to market sooner. And these different ways of discussions with regulatory agencies and collaborations have really led to the revolution such as immunotherapy, where the survival rate is now, as you can see from the slide, that tail of the curve is where most people are now being cured of cancers that were deemed incurable prior to the advent of immunotherapy. Now, we're doing some different things at Lilly, and I'll end on this. In 2015, it took us about 10.1 years from the time a drug entered the clinic, the first patient, to the time it was approved. In 2018, we've shaved off that time to 7.9 years, but the industry average still remains at about 9 years. So we still have a long way to go, and most of us recognize that a decade from the time we've discovered something in a pill to the time we make it available is still too long. So I'll finish on this thought, which is all of this is really exciting. We have to think about the innovation, the money, the collaboration, and most of all, the time. We have to work together. The cure that we all want has not been achieved in the way that we've been approaching this, and so it's a time to really think about new ways of focusing on cancer cures. My belief is that through these 4 things, we'll have some more major breakthroughs, and it's really setting the seeds for us all to get behind a revolution towards a better treatment and even a cure for cancer. So thank you very much.